about that, but today I won't be talking about skinny jeans. I really want to thank everyone here for giving me the opportunity to finally come to a place where many scholars think and work and play in the fields that really inspire me. My work has been inspired in particular by someone at this table, Charlie Pio, whose work on future is very important to me, Catherine Mathers, whose work on media and representations of Africa is central to my work as well. So it's just such a real privilege and treat. I really want to thank the Center for African and African American Research and the Department of African and African American Studies. Dr. Vincent Brown has made a beautiful visit already, and Bernice Patterson is a true gem. I'm going to do something I don't ever do, really, which is not have a PowerPoint, read, but there will be music. And as these talks go, there will be a little awkward kind of in framing with some beautiful ethnographic pieces, followed by a conclusion that pushes, hopefully provocatively, towards thinking about futures and hope, which we can have a really fantastic conversation about. If you pay, it will show. Better television and Zambia. I have a hunger for better TV, read the headline in the Lusaka newspaper. The editorial compared the Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation's television license program to fund better content delivery to being served an empty plate at the dinner table. ZNBC's license campaign ran on the motto, "If you pay, it will show," from 2004 until 2010. The television license scheme was instituted with the objective of funding better content while restructuring the station into one partially funded by the public, or as officials put it, by and for the public. The license was added as a fee to electricity bills. This call to pay insisted that paying the license fee would fill the nearly empty television broadcasting infrastructures of Zambia with content. Not just any content, but what ZNBC, the only non-cable television station at the time in Zambia, called better. Not the best, not innovative, just better, was the sarcastic response by most who heard the slogan. ZNBC pled with the public that better content was worth the personal cost of 3,000 kwacha, at the time less than $1 shifted now, per electricity bill, and that until you paid, watching whatever showed was an illegal act. The TV licensing scheme, however, was not a success. The rumbling appetite for better TV went unfed, and as the author wrote, ZNBC threw the hunger of many into the microwave of excuses. The inedible mess that resulted was set adrift on a surprising assemblage of courtship, popular music, and hopes for other not yet Zambians. ZNBC had the infrastructures, the material cables, the analog capacity to broadcast better television. Yet as the campaign faltered, ZNBC could not fill those cables with the global and sophisticated African medias they had promised. Rather than merely yield public disappointment in Zambia with the failure of modern infrastructures to function as it should, a dream hope for Zambia in which, when it shows, we will pay, came to life in response. The mix of eye-rolling surprise and hungry love songs that met the Zambia National Broadcasting Campaign became a moment in which communication infrastructures that would not fulfill their intended purpose were put into the service of the production of the future. A Zambia that might be. The question of what it means to produce a future in economies of decline in a post-developmental world in which you can awaken to headlines that read, "There is no future for youth in Zambia," or "Is this Zambia or is this hell?" is a critical one. Ashila Membe writes that in contemporary African experience, the quote, "developmental life course is displaced by a life course assimilated to the game of chance, a lottery in which the existential temporal horizon is colonized by the immediate present." As the Zambian rapper Crisis wrote in his song Valley of the Shadows, sounding very much like Ashila Membe, "I'm a youth with," I almost had that inverted, I'm a youth with no future, graduated in '92, still don't have a job or any survival tools. What am I to do? Look at how this country repaid me. No options. The Constitution didn't provide a choice. No voice. Following the campaign for better TV helps us to understand how central media circulation is to the politics of the future in this, quote, time in which temporality is bargained with and against as people invest in a range of ever-elusive futures. To use two people in this room, Anne Allison and Charlie Pio's description of the present from their most recent introduction to cultural anthropology. Media circulation is not just important to Zambian futures, but that which can be used to create the very practices of imagining futures worth acting for and upon. Now for a little theoretical framing. While literatures on and of cultures of circulation have inspired very nuanced studies of media, I suggest that following the responses to the Zambian campaign also helps us to recast and open up the role that infrastructure and its social life and our understanding of media worlds might play. Literature on the transformative effects of media and circulation on time, space, and lives often assume not only a working infrastructure, but that as long as there is infrastructure, it will be filled with the stuff of global media dream worlds. Indeed, in the issue of public culture that first celebrated the cultures of circulation approach, it was suggested that circulation as an approach and analytic allows us to simultaneously, in our grasp, keep both the, quote, quiet generative matrix, the slow, careful work of creating the structural conditions of mobility, and the, quote, shiny things available for transfiguration and translation in our grasp. My work on media's distribution in Zambia suggests that the relationship between infrastructures and commodities is not quite as simple. Sometimes infrastructures are themselves transfigured and fabulous, especially when they stand at the ready for the global and are never quite filled. The Zambian TV licensing campaign illustrates that perhaps more is at stake when the problem is not that the infrastructure isn't present or doesn't work, but rather fails to do as we assume it will, move fantastic media commodities into our presence and present. Infrastructure may be the structural and material conditions of mobility, as Brian Larkin writes, yet it also has a social life. Instead of approaching the moment in which better TV did not come as a problem to be solved, attending to how Zambians themselves put this moment of media circulation into the service of a possible future helps us to rethink media circulation in questions of African futures. Zambians were enchanted by the relationship between media form and content the campaign for better TV posed. The relationship between the lack of content and its empty distributive agents became a sonorous love song with annoyingly funny and affectionate chords. Better Television became the song Beta TV, which became a Beta Zambia. The awkward encounter among Better Television and its Zambian street lingo translation beta, by youth, and the notion of beta as an incomplete version of a product released for initial testing, was a site of sticky materiality and enchanted connections and breakages. These connections and breakages, much like the disordered time of the economy of decline in Zambia, combined to offer a method of future orientation that was not confident, but explosive with potentiality and dreams. This future Zambia story with the encounter of ready but almost empty infrastructure has three scenes. First, the story of Better Television as mixed signal courtship. Second, the love song of Beta TV as youth flirtation with the pleasures of empty infrastructure. And in the last scene, the ways the gap between better and beta enable alternative future Zambias with reoriented temporality. The media infrastructures that enable media circulation, so often coded as the site of quiet, slow, careful practices, of development planners and security technocrats, is also a flamboyant, sexy, heartbreaking sight of the stuff of methods of hope. Scene 1. Better television. Scandalous suitors come bearing content. Better television's infrastructural life was at stake in two ways simultaneously in Zambia during the campaign that ended in 2010. Since 2002, Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation had been placed under the mandate to become partially funded by the public. The If You Pay, It Will Show licensing scheme was one part of this broader project. The media field in general was also supposed to be liberalizing. Pay-per-view cable existed in the form of MultiChoice, a South African-based content provider and distributor for all of Anglophone Africa. MultiChoice did not produce content in Zambia, but served as a distributor of monthly cable plans, which came to a total of about $70 a month. An expose on MultiChoice showed that Zambians paid the highest subscription rates for the fewest stations continent-wide. This led to street protests and a legal suit that demanded government intervention. Protesting private television's limited but excellent content and high cost overlapped with the loud public outcry at having to pay a small cost to improve the terrible content on public television. During the protests, I met with MultiChoice executives in Lusaka. There were signs lofted outside and lawyers threatening suits. The charge? Zambians paid the highest amount continent-wide for the least amount of content. Cliff Ciccone, the marketing director, laughed a little, swung his chair side to side. I asked him about the sign holders outside. Well, here they are protesting the fact that they pay $70 a month for football games and soap operas. They could be protesting the fact that there are street children. But that they don't care about. And anyway, it's not important. Even if there were only 2 stations on pay-per-view and they had Manchester United in Days of Our Lives, every single one would eventually pay. You think they want to watch some crappy ZNBC drama? You might as well watch an empty box. They wave their signs, but at the end of the day, they'll pay, because at least we have the shows. This was liberalized Zambia, where you put up with pretty bad delivery because you were worried about better content. In contrast, another media storm was raging. At the kitchen table of the Tembos that same month, everyone assembled, doubled over in laughter. Did you see this? I mean, did you really see this? Nick waved his copy of the paper in the air and slammed it down on the counter. If you pay, it will show? What will they buy with everyone's 3,000 kwacha? Sesame Street episodes from 1975? Mary scoffed. This is Zambia, my dear. Only in Zambia would we protest the cable company and hate our pathetic ZNBC. MultiChoice and ZNBC were courting the Zambian public. They were both being rejected by their potential lovers. ZNBC's potential dinner dates saw them as a badly cooked meal in the microwave of excuses. MultiChoice was offering up the skimpiest, dreariest bouquet, reminding Zambians of their marginal position in the regional romance economy. ZNBC unsettled the object of their affections by asking that viewers pay for the date they didn't even agree to. MultiChoice had the resources to wine and to dine, so accepting that wilted small bouquet seemed a high cost to pay to watch Manchester United. The surprise caused by both of these suitors in the field of a deregulated media infrastructure led to other flirtations. These suitors were annoying and seemed to misunderstand the pleasures of television watching. Better television seemed a lot like the promise of joining the global economy, a plate of badly reheated leftovers. But better television was not all that was available. Scene 2. Beta TV. Better is not the same as beta in Zambia. A common way of greeting in the evening is to ask, feeling better? Replying to Mligwanji, how's it, with beta, and not with good or bueno, says you are cool, and taking the edge off the day with the crew. Its relationship to better is an awkward, teasing, flirtatious one. Better is proper. Better might be for ZNBC officials who don't understand that even if people pay, the content will not come. Better is for South African cable companies that have content but dangle it scandalously. On the heels of the two controversies over television's better distribution in Zambia, a chart topper resulted called Beta TV. This #1 single would be, as Ernest Bloch suggested of mass media's potential, placed in the service of a futurity that still deserves our action, hope, composition, and dreaming. The song offered the source for a method that redirected the scandal toward what might become. And I think my computer took a little nap. It's worth it.
Show. I am sorry, my brother. It's the 7th time on the paper TV. I don't need no lava, but if you pay, it will show.
We'll hear more. It's a tease. I told her that, baby, I have liked you, so what do you think? She answered me that. I'm sorry, my brother, us we work like better TV. I don't need no lover, but if you pay, it will show. So begins Danny's commentary on better television versus better TV. The phrase, I'm sorry, my brother, us we work like better TV, I don't need no lover, but if you pay, it will show, foregrounds the relationship that better and beta and infrastructure and hope might have. What did it mean to reply to a suitor that us we work like better TV? Did that mean to say that uninterested dates were merely putting the best courtship intentions into the microwave of excuses? Did it imply that love was like an infrastructure ready to be filled? The pleasure in declaring if you pay, it will show in this chart topper lay in two delicious pieces of information. First, most can't pay. And second, even if you pay, it isn't going to show. This is not a mere discursive wrangle around translation and flirtation. In everyday practice and conversation, Danny's flirtatious infrastructural parallel, Beta TV, was put to hopeful use. One example shows this very well. At Jazz Club on a hot December night, many girls had gathered to feel better after a long day's work. A young man in an open-collared dress shirt that screamed downtown accountancy job was very insistent. He begged, as many men did, for Kafula's number. She asked for a drink, but did not give her number. Kafula stared the suitor down, and her lips turned in a crafty smile, and she said, well, we'll see. If you pay, it will show. The power of this response began to infiltrate marketing meetings, street corner deals, and even complaints about education delivery and the state of retail in Zambia. And the power lay in its double move of hilarious distancing and flirtation with the not yet. The double enchantment of the response lies in the awkward gap between being asked to pay for that which you should not have to, and knowing that taking up the payment indicates nothing about results. The awareness was made painfully clear by any speaker of the phrase. The beginning of courtship and the possible disappointed rejection are contained in the same moment of paying. Hope necessarily contains its own disappointment, after all. That awkward moment is not merely one of dreams made possible by making fun of empty infrastructural promise, but by a direct engagement with media's distributive possibilities as a way of apprehending development's broken promise. It is productive not only of jokes and songs and practices in bars, but for imagining another Zambia in which better TV is not the goal, and the adoration for unfulfilled infrastructure mixes with hopes for its transformation. Seated. Another beta Zambia. Beta, as it is spelled in Zambia, is also beta. in the sense of a beta version. This refers to a platform, usually of software, ready for preliminary release, but not complete yet. For example, one can upload current beta versions of any of your email servers. You can have Windows beta. I have it, it's not great. Beta versions aspire to be both better and better, but they are not finished yet. They are always in process, being tested, running a trial-free version. Beta is indeterminacy. The beta version of Zambia that spun off the campaign that brought infrastructural emptiness to center stage had a particular ethic. Beta Zambia was a place in which the response to the suitor sounded different.
One day, Uluwanga, Anayanka Mapepelo Yanga, Presidenta Idenda, Usipunga Muliswiti, Umulanga Utino Chuka, Wasmaina Sisi Zahenda, Wastina Ziva, Tina Pesa, Chikunde Chandaile. I am happy, my baby, Navana Upesa, my beta TV, Olo Pila, honey. I am happy, my baby. Nakupenda mapenda TV. Ololipila honey. You will still be sure. I am happy, my baby.
I like that dance hall beat.
Oh, I know, it beats. We need to up the bass a little, but. One day my God answered my prayers. I was walking alone and bumped into my sweetie. I looked at her, my heart leapt with joy, my hair moved, and I knew I had found my love. Yeah, I'm happy, my baby, because I have found you, my beta TV. Without paying you, honey, I know it will still show. Without paying you, honey, I know it will still show was one way to capture beta Zambia. Another ran into commentary, when it shows we will pay, a phrase widely used to indicate that the trial version of a better Zambia should be free, that the cost should be tabulated after the results have been seen. This ethic of waiting on it showing was broadly applied to everything from music to customer service at MultiChoice to government media reforms. This beta Zambia was one in which the knowledge that uncertain results from attempts to fill up waiting infrastructures might very well fail, but something will still show. It might not be better TV, but it would be better television. And that television, despite the ways it might mark for some at ZNBC the failure of media liberalization and the lack of a smooth, efficient filling up of infrastructures at the ready, would be a willing love all the same. In beta Zambia, empty infrastructures are not empty. They are filled with sound, song, and flirtation, and the radical openness of the not yet. The attempt to put into place modes of filling media's distributive wires with better content resulted in another surprising set of affiliations, languages, and lives that emerged as a beta Zambia in which it still shows, and those shows are willing. This is not just another moment of particularity and specificity that runs a popular song contra to understandings of cultures of circulation that poses seamless filling up of phantasmagoric content into empty infrastructures. The unsettling laughter, shock, scoffing, and practices of waiting that resulted from this campaign are more than an anthropological veto gesture. The gaps between better TV, a better Zambia, and a beta Zambia also pose challenges to approaches to infrastructure and the conditions of media's movement. In flirting with the gaps between better, beta, and beta Zambia, media infrastructure and distribution exceeded mere base structure that required agents to fill it with meaning. It became productive of another better Zambia, in which when it shows, we will pay, placing the capacity to circulate media and its politics into the center of the debate about futures and their imagination. It is my own hope that beta TV leads us to another beta engagement with the politics and media circulation in our own work that considers the production of futures. These strategies of coming to terms with the broken promises of development and the consequential disorder or crisis of the future suggest we need to find ways of orienting our work toward the temporal experiences of our subjects that pays attention to the way temporality itself is reordered by informants. It is a particularly timely consideration given the numbers of suggestions that digital communications infrastructural development will be the primary mode of African development in the next decade, and the mobile phone application its primary tool. Beta TV is a tale that reminds us that there is an important critical attention to be placed on the spaces between content delivery and on the surprise social affiliations and worlds enabled by bumps in the smooth operation of media circuits. In the small teasing essay, Can Hope Be Disappointed? Ernest Locke wrote, hope is not confidence. It does not prescribe what Beta Zambia must become or should be, only what it might be. Since hope dwells in the not yet, in a space of indeterminacy, it contains the condition of defeat within itself. Hope stands so close to historical processes of indeterminacy and danger, to all that has not yet been won or lost, and fear and memory balance its every pole. The method of hope is constantly revised and even knows its own futility. Hope, the going beyond, can take many forms, and in Lusaka it took the form of loading and testing a version of a beta Zambia, until that too encountered a shifting world, was disappointed, demanded revision. The crisis of the future came back into view. The future again looked prescribed, as though it could only be a series of short-term calculations. In 2010, the If You Pay, It Will Show campaign was given up, as were the television licenses. ZNBC moved from better TV to fair coverage, and from television licenses to an additional levy on television sales. Fair coverage has been ridiculed, most claiming that every camera purchased with the If You Pay, It Will Show fees has been turned into ruling party cameras covering ruling party activities. Fair coverage has not yet shown. As one Post subscriber wrote, please tell ZNBC we can do without their services for now, until such a time when they shall be innovative enough. ZNBC should not cheat itself by thinking the people appreciate its services since they have never shown. 2011 is a defining year for Zambia elections, and we shall determine our future.
We have lots of time for questions. Do you want to take your own questions, or would you like me to?
Well, if I might start.
Sure.
Well, the initial intention behind this this tax, was it to subsidize local movie production, and were the funds poorly distributed, or were there just there was no one ready to produce movies?
Well,
the
the initial fees were to acquire better content, not to produce any content at all. The promise was to ZNBC, which is the only, there's now actually a TV2 in Lusaka, but up until 2010 there was only one station, ZNBC. And public complaints have been escalating about, indeed, the 1970s Sesame Street episodes, the reruns of MacGyver. So the promise of the campaign was that if you own some part of us, we will bring you the two things you want. One, more contemporary, more quote modern media from the rest of the world, and more contemporary, continental, sophisticated media, which there was hunger for. At the same period, multi-choice that was getting protested in Lusaka was producing a great deal of wonderful and scandalously fabulous continental programming, such as Big Brother Africa, Project Fame, and there was definitely a desire to be a part of this move towards this sophisticated cosmopolitan African media production. So Better TV was supposed to bring, at the very least, a little bit of each of those things. It turns out that those fees, it was very difficult to collect. Electricity bills are most often in quite default. Nobody wants to stand in the queue at the Zesco office, right? It's quite a painful process. And they did collect some funds. They did not end up buying content. They ended up shifting their strategy in late 2010 to local production, as you suggest, might have been a good idea. And they did purchase some cameras. It's now election season in Zambia, and there is wide dissatisfaction with the media field. And so the fair coverage move was to suggest that we know we failed you with Better TV. So runs the commentary. We failed you in Better TV, but we can offer you fair coverage. So that's what I can offer you.
Maybe it just escaped me, but when did they actually introduce the fee?
In 2004.
So it exists for 6 years.
Yeah. And now they actually tax at the point of sale.
Yeah.
What is apparently quite outrageous.
And just another factual question: why was the satellite offer more expensive for Zambia than it would have been in another place?
I actually never figured this out. Zambia's multi-choice marketing director suggested that it was because Zambians were so hungry, this hunger for content, that they could be exploited and they would pay more than anyone else because there wasn't a lot of local production. The less local production in Zambia than in Zimbabwe, than in Malawi. So a very sort of hungry media audience that would pay. So those who could pay would pay. They did end up getting their bouquet extended. So they got some more music video programming stations, which is a good thing.
What about news? What sort of news stations were they picking up?
They, in the cable bouquet?
Yeah, or what sorts of news is getting distributed and not better TV?
Well, there's a very lively newspaper industry in Lusaka. I quoted the Post quite a bit. It's a very strong, independent newspaper voice. There were, between 2004 and 2008, 5 different newspapers, and the circulation numbers seemed quite high. There was a youth newspaper as well that covered politics and news. In terms of news on television, it was ZNBC and ZNBC alone. And I mean, if you've read stuff about local African news production, they were made fun of a lot. In terms of the cable stations, they got CNN was in the bouquet, and some South African news dailies, like hour-long shows, would also come on.
What is high circulation in Zambia for a newspaper? What does that actually mean?
It's actually not that high. It's maybe 30,000. But I mean, as many would suggest, those papers circulate. I mean, it's very hard to track. This is one of the things I actually was working with some of the radio stations and some of the youth papers on. It was like, I mean, I don't really have the skills, so don't anybody ask me to do this. But baseline data is very hard to figure out because of the ways in which television and radio and news is consumed. So people would always extrapolate, well, every paper is being read by this number of people. So it's very, and then it's very hard to gauge exactly how many people are reading each post how many people are gathering in each house to watch cable TV, etc. So the numbers are quite tricksy.
But it is very high because you would have the best-selling paper in Morocco would be 30,000. So
Yeah,
you have
it's very high.
it actually begs for explanation why you would have 30,000 in Zambia.
First.
Is there a, and so what you're telling us is or what you're reporting on is that there's a kind of ironic approach that many people in Lusaka anyway take towards their national television. Bemused, irony, certainly don't take it seriously. I wonder if there's a way you can trace that as a historically. I wonder if there's a moment at which that begins to happen. Because, I've spent most of my time in sub-Saharan Africa, in Mali, and there's lots of reasons to be ironic and bemused about Malian TV. But my sense is that there's relatively limited commentary of the sort that you're describing there. And that actually people take rather seriously some of the developmental initiatives that still find their way onto TV, these programs that are sometimes sponsored by international donors of various sorts to people's behavior, people's health initiatives, these sorts of things. And that there's an enormous popularity to these Latin American soap operas that come up. Enormous popularity. People that have no idea of the French that are WTV still and absolutely fascinated. So I wonder if there's a way you can talk about, or if this even makes sense, if there's a moment at which that shifts, and is that connected to a particular relationship to, Chalupa or the sort of the state, the way the state works at a certain point? Is it connected to multi-partyism? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think yes, and then no. I think definitely related to a moment with Chalupa. I think that's right. So there were a lot of sort of, if we use this term hopeful kind of loosely, there was a lot of hopeful discourse when Chalupa first took office in Zambia that perhaps this would be the new Zambia, given Zambia's sort of history of decline since the 70s and the copper crash. It had been very hard to imagine Zambia becoming a part of the so-called neoliberal moment. And even when Chalupa took office, that language appeared in the press and in people's conversations that this would be a moment for new nationalism that would fit into the new global economy. There was a lot of new. At the end of Chalupa's reign, those same folks, some of which got quoted in my talk, said basically it's time to turn out the lights on Zambia. There is no hope, and I think certainly that moment is an important one in terms of engagement with Zambia's place in the worldness, and maybe that strategy of, you called it irony. I think there's a little more there. I think the other thing that's really important to remember about Zambia is that it is in the Southern African circuit that is so closely related to South African media and the relationship that Zambians have to a certain longing for and admiration of what they call modern African things that come from South Africa, combined with the tension around the fact that the South Africans, quote unquote, own us. That is, every mall I go to, every movie theater I go to is owned by South Africans. Know this on my love South Africans. But I think also the relationship to this longing or hunger that I'm talking about and that you pointed to has a lot to do with the relationship to post-apartheid South Africa's media circulation and reach, and the ways in which Johannesburg particularly, but other places in South Africa, feature in the Zambian media imagination. I think that's a really good place to take that as well. I love that question. That's really good.
I think sort of the other side of that question in a way is, could you talk a bit more about how the sort of disappointed hopefulness or hope or disappointment embodied in like if it shows will pay or
Yeah.
if how does it translate or pop up in sort of in different spheres of life and demands in relation to either the Zambian state or economy or global development agencies or sort of organizations like sort of these South African malls and whatever in the country. So just sort of how that becomes sort of articulated into different parts of life.
Lots of spheres. I mean, it was actually, why I'm still even thinking about this at all is because of the number of spheres it permeated. I think I mentioned education reform. So there were some shifts towards, everything was about fees. There were some shifts towards reassessing school fees. And a headline ran in the newspaper, education, when it showed we will pay. And the relationship there is, Zambian so long. I mean, even Wanawasa during the 2000s kept saying publicly, we all must tighten our belts together. And this kind of constant berating of I must suffer for the nation and pay more for my education, that sort of frustration was expressed through the hopefulness of if I wait, perhaps it will show. And I'm not going to pay anymore until it does. The sort of disappointing, ironic, sad piece of this, of course, is that while it is a very powerful moment of radical openness, it's immediately foreclosed because waiting nothing shows. Education did not become free, better content did not come, and it also was widely used in retail spheres. So Zambians complain a lot about the experience of shopping, and there was a sense that retail expects that we should pay and then it will show, but that's not how retail works in other places in the world. So that became also a claim for better customer service in the retail sphere. It was a very, we could probably find uses for when it shows I will pay.
Don't be lost on us.
Yeah, exactly. I think we can relate.
Yeah, could you say a little bit more about the relationship between sticky materiality, sticky infrastructure, and maturity? Your whole talk was about that, but
yes.
If you could just sort of maybe try and boil that down. As one question. And the other is, it's really interesting how this sort of category of maturity, of hope, which is so important in theory studies and in the social worlds that a lot of us study, that it's such an empty category as well, right? It's so hard to put your finger on what that is. And you ask people about it, and they sort of, say these pretty banal things, right? About what that means, but it's so important in their lives.
Yes, the banalness of hope. So first, this question of infrastructure, future, materiality, hope, and kind of what maybe just boiling that down in some ways. I think sort of how I came to this particular sort of fabulizing approach to infrastructure and its relationship to the future came out of a kind of a frustration with the writing about media infrastructure or the lack thereof. We have Brian Larkin, who probably many of you have engaged with and read, as one example. But it seems in the talk about development, especially contemporary development, digital and analog media infrastructure play such a huge, like a starring role, I would almost say. And certainly in Silicon Valley, when any talk about African futures is brought up, it is linked directly to the development of more media infrastructure. So I first became sort of turned onto the link between ideas about the future and media infrastructure and infrastructure itself through just listening to that discourse. Then, speaking of engaging with, speaking of cell phones.
Who did you pick? Nicely done. Great performance.
The world often says these for us. But then I think that infrastructure is tricksy, and I'm still working it out in the sense that it is a place of great materiality. That is, we're talking about cables, wires, boxes, switches, and it's very important to, in a way, foreground the sort of material relations that having or not having those distributive agents can do for your place in the global and regional economies. On the other hand, the stickiness to it, I think, is a way to try to get at the social life of those cables, boxes, and switches, and to say that when they work but do not fulfill their intended ends, there's a whole series of affiliations, I believe Simone talks about this a lot, that can come out of engagement with that. It's very hard to do. It's no joke when it's said we must keep these two things in our grasp, but it is the right thing to do, and yet to move between them is so difficult analytically. And I tend towards the fabulizing here, right? I mean, this was not necessarily about the materiality of the infrastructure. On the banal of hope.
It's the banality of the commentary about it. I mean,
yeah, but it's true about the commentary about popular music too, right? I mean, there's a certain when I was first working on this idea of futures in Lusaka, I was talking a lot about aspirations with people, and you're right. I mean, you get a singular answer a lot in terms of your informants who will say, yes, I'm hopeful for the future. Yes, I think I should move to Johannesburg and not stay in Lusaka. I mean, the story is very repetitive. But then there are these other ways in which, right, this is why maybe we do ethnography. There are these ways in which the engagement with the television campaign kind of illuminated other ways futures were working out. I mean, the category of hope, so much to say, has been recuperated for anthropology, for political purposes, to many ends. And I think turning towards block sometimes helps in terms of thinking as hope as not a category, but a method, a sort of practice in the world. But how I think to gauge in the social world we work in, how those practices are unfolding. I think it's very hard. I'm struggling with it because I both love the idea of the not yet and that moment of radical openness and its relationship to cultural production, aesthetics, to music, to mass media. And yet, the traction it gives us, we have to struggle with that very analytically.
I couldn't always follow when you were ventriloquizing someone else, so I may be running risk of slippage here. But in terms of Charlie's point about the category of hope being empty, which I think oftentimes is the case with categories that travel so much, right? Because they have to be filled with a content in a specific place and then sort of very empty. But it struck me that two of the dominant metaphors that recur, and I'm wondering if these have to do with hope in some tenuous way, are nourishment and love.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So I don't know what kind of ideological work that's doing for hope in that particular context. But that is very striking, you know, and sort of one level of remove. Yeah, about some kind of feeding of the soul, or as well as the body.
No, the courtship, the sort of root metaphor of courtship throughout, the sort of like and in a way romancing the future, is very striking. And how we can take love, and that there's lots of people are now, this again category that's circulating kind of wildly amongst us lately, love, right, as an analytic, as an but I think there is a certain, is it romance, is it nostalgia, you know, there is romance there. The nourishment is a beautiful part of the root metaphor here, but I haven't been able to sort of take that. But the hunger, I mean, it's a very striking element.
This is a suggestion. I might make a little more of the irony that's entailed in engagements with hope and the future, in the sense that the irony makes the disappointment bearable. Can make the disappointments bearable. And I'm thinking actually what prompts me to this is the twinning of hope and disappointment in Julie Livingston's work in Botswana on suicide. How investments in marriages that people take out loans for can collapse, and then marriages fall apart, and domestic violence and suicide can result from this. This is very unironic and unbearable disappointment. That's the title of her article. And I wonder if part of what is appealing about tropes of hope and the future as such is their emptiness and their capacity for irony, making disappointment bearable.
There's a great line that one of the youth I worked with said, and I think that you're right, this is just reminding me of this irony or a certain wizened hope. Ernest Bloch talks about that as well. He said, he actually said, I'm quoting this, I'm not making this into a composite quote, this is direct quote. He said, he's an aspiring musician in a lot of reality television shows, said, once I question marked my dreams, I became more hopeful. I think there's something there that links up with what you're talking about in terms of questioning, playing with, taking an ironic stance to wisening in relationship to history. All of those things allow you to have a wizened hope. And certainly I think or makes the disappointment, as you say, bearable, because the question mark is hanging in front of it already. So I think I really like that. We're on with that.
I have a question. It's a little bit more about your work more broadly as opposed to your specific talk, but I think it also relates to the ideas of futurity and hope and things. But to start, I was wondering if you could say a little bit about what you mean by youth, and I don't just mean factually what age, because I find that sort of a difficult and complicating category. For example, I work in Zimbabwe with performance poets and artists and things, and I went into that work really not wanting to focus on youth, but it just felt overwhelmed by the term empower the youth, and that's all that's on people's minds, and the people I worked with, they were themselves artists, and then they would have a side project of empowering the youth, but you are the youth, it's very difficult to have for that to have meaning. So I wonder, in Zambia, if you sort of experienced the same thing, and why you made the decision to then frame your work as being about the youth.
That's a great question. That's a fantastic question. There are a couple of reasons and a couple of things to say about that. The category of youth is, of course, a highly contested zone, right? Of in many ways, struggle over definitions and interventions by many forces, factors, agents, and folks. And one of the things that the literature on youth and the category of youth in Southern Africa in particular that has been remarked upon is the ways in which this category has both been, just bear with me for a truncated. That is, children become soldiers, right? So there is no sort of like stretched out youth as you come of age into adulthood, and yet simultaneously extended into the far horizons, such that you can be 45, have an accountancy job, and still in many ways fit into a social category that is youthful. That is, you aren't married, you aren't employed. So that sort of disordering of the developmental, this is sort of to hark back to Ashiel and others, of the developmental life course. That is, there isn't this obvious coming of age motion, but rather a jumbled category that then, which as Deborah Durham has suggested, is highly contested and becomes explosive with both potentiality, right? This is a huge category of people who might be able to leapfrog into the future through digital engagements, have the potential for mobility in new ways, but at the same time possess a great danger to the state. That is, they are in many ways a hyper disappointed group of folks. And their sociality and their music and even Big Brother Africa, right, becomes a sort of danger to the state. In Zambia, Big Brother Africa was almost banned, which is another aspect of something I read a lot about. So this makes the category of youth a moving target, and it's why it becomes so important for Zambians in relationship to thinking about the future, because there are so many folks, as you say, also international organizations, intervening in the mix of opening, shutting, truncating, fighting about, having moral panics over youth and youth culture. There was a newspaper moral panic advert run against Big Brother Africa as precisely the corruption of Zambian culture by youth culture. And a ruination.
Meaning a global youth.
Yeah, but also meaning a cosmopolitan African culture that was not of the true high African ideals. So all of this puts, at least in Zambia, and I suspect in Zimbabwe, in your situation, puts this group of people, this category itself, into such great motion and contestation and struggle that it becomes a central site over how futures are talked about. So that's how.
But do you think it makes it hard to talk about future when, or what the vision of the future is constantly put in the youth, and that youth is such a moving target and so volatile that I just think there's something in your talk and my thoughts of difficulties with this category of youth. Like there's some connection that I think is sort of interesting, that it's really kind of it's quite difficult to envision the future if you're so vested in the future of the youth that there's so much that's missing about the future other than just beyond the youth. Like I don't know if you thought about future and youth together in that way, or if it's sort of two separate things to you.
I just thought about MTV 16 and like Super 16 party. The whole culture of youth really invested in their wedding reception being their 16th birthday party.
Well, there's a reason why there's a lot of songs that say the children are the future. I mean, there is a way in which, I don't know that I've thought about it in the same way as you, and I'm not particularly worried about categories getting defined. That is, I'm interested in how they are getting fought over, right? That is, I don't really care where youth ends and begins, if it's 15 to 45. Rather, what's being negotiated through and around that category. And there's, lots of good work there from Paul Gilroy onwards about sort of these kinds of questions all over. Great stuff in India right now written about youth and waiting. Like, there's a lot of stuff that goes with that.
Well, I was just going to say that it sounds like from this conversation that also youth is kind of an empty category. It's not just hope is empty. I mean, I do all my work in Japan, where there is not a whole lot of hope because youth are not seen to have much of a future because there's a definition of having a regular job, which youth are now kind of deprived of. So there's a very kind of concrete notion of what defines aspirations and success, and it's defined by the past. And the past is over, I mean, particularly now, but it was already over. And so there's this reference in a past that people are still hanging on to, and the youth are still hanging on to it too, but by that definition, there's not a whole lot of hope and there's not a whole lot of futurity. But when you talk about hope and future and youth, it all sounds vague and, free-floating. It may be a provocative, ironic, or hopeful way that in Japan, I mean, one of my frustrations is why are you holding on to something that it's over? And it wasn't that great to begin with because it came with a lot of problems, but there's such a investment in something that is holding people back. And again, the hopelessness
It's the opposite of the Zambian, or Togolese case, right? Where they had hyper-modernity. They had it all. They had the best of everything. And they had it on Japanese terms, right? These folks are trying to get, on that pathway.
Well, in the midst of the copper boom, they had money.
That's right.
This was one of the most industrialized economies in Africa in the 60s and 70s.
That's right.
So they saw it, but they've lost it, and they've given up on that past.
Yeah, in a way, they were understudies, right, to this sort of global inclusion in an economy that would be not hyper-modern, but modern. And there is talk in Zambia about, in the past, they sometimes say, and of course, our dear Jim Ferguson has written a lot about this, but in the past we were modern. And the future might be bleak. It also might be getting out of this economy of decline because there's a tease of economic growth right now. So, and I think in terms of that temporal relationship, that's why these cases are different from the Japanese case.
One thing that strikes me about your central trope is that it's an if-then condition. And I'm wondering about the terms or the conditions that people are thinking in terms of. One, obviously, they think that cash payment is one of those conditions. Is it the condition, or is it the is it the if, or is it the then? So they're toying with which will come first if there's a choice between cash first or cash later.
Cash later. I mean,
which way is it going to work? Some they reverse it, and it's not clear which one they're taking literally and which one they're proposing as ironic. So I can understand within this if-then pursuit of a better future, they're looking at education and whether it's going to pay off or whether we have to pay for education. They can debate around what will lead to progress through education, what will lead to progress through immigration. But even in light of the aspiration that the internet is going to be Africa's hope to participate in the world economy, I'm wondering why they focused their if-then concern within television, a one-way medium that doesn't earn you much money. And they're not even producing profitably most of the programming that's going to go on it. Why not an if-then condition that puzzles over how we're going to get internet services better distributed in Africa, or an if-then condition that in which primary production of copper becomes not such a vacillating generator of profit, but a constantly profitable thing. I mean, what is it about social life in Zambia that's making them focus on television?
It's not the images. It's not the images of a fantasy.
You see it.
It's the dream world.
It's the dream world of TV, right?
Media dream world that Benjamin talks about that we see. I mean, it's a very important historical moment that this happens in Zambia, and there's a reason why it's a televisual. Though I would argue there's always a reason for the televisual. But in this moment, I would suggest that this intense focus on the field of television is both because of the media dream world, the images of either self-representation or possible belonging in some sort of larger global order, which happens through the active reception and speaking back to the consumption of television. But also, it was a historical moment in which South Africa and Nigeria both began to produce these quite strong, interesting, possible modern African medias, which were very enchanting in the sense that they both pose, and they pose different models of African modernity, but they're both as popular. Certainly South African soapies and Nollywood films are loved by the same people, including me. And I think given that moment, it made a lot of sense that what is modern is, and what is a way out of being in decline, is a media dream world.
But of course, you can look at the media on the internet too, and you can go to movie theaters too.
Well, the trouble with internet cafes is that media watching in internet cafes is quite expensive and takes up a lot. So most of these are not sort of cable bandwidths, right? So there aren't, if you don't bring your own headphones, you can't listen.
And it's not as social too. I mean, the TV scenes in these homes every night in Lomé, there's 15 people sitting there.
Yeah, there's a sociality to TV. That there can be around binge watching television on the internet, but it's quite, and internet is primarily located for the time being in internet cafes, which I think haven't quite, they don't work as distribution agents in the same way, but they may.
I kind of wanted to come at a similar question from what I think is probably a more naive angle. The discussion of the vagueness of hope just reminds me of the aphorism, hope is not a plan. And I wonder, we know a lot about what people are cynical about it, right? And what kinds of plans haven't worked and the failures of the state. But I wonder if you could start from the other direction and give us a sense of the ethnography of planning. What kind of plans do people have faith in? What kind of plans do they think will work, right? And what do people think, like, this is a doable thing that I can do? And how is it that they then come to invest their hopes, right, in the thing that they think might be doable because they have faith in certain kinds of plans and not others?
Well, interestingly, at the moment between 2004 and 2008, a very doable youth plan was to be in reality television. And I think that to some degree this was true in a few other sites, including the UK, but there was an idea, because the media field is quite small in Lusaka, and the South African reality television shows became so popular continent-wide, there became an idea that getting into a reality television show was possible, strategic, and would move you out, this is the escape fantasy, would move you out of sort of a foreclosed Lusaka, at least into Johannesburg or into a different kind of Lusaka. And it actually did work for some young people. And though at a certain moment it became disappointed, that is, people started to see or say, do you really think I should try to get into another reality TV show? Maybe this is, but very interestingly, for a while it circulated as a very doable strategy towards moving out and through. Also at the same time, music production was seen as a very doable, possible occupation, because all you needed was to know one person who had an old desktop, and you could make, I love Danny, but this was not complicated production. And you could get a song on the radio, and they would pay to play, and then in vice versa, right? Radio stations would give you a little bit of money for your single, and you wouldn't get an album deal out of it, but you'd get a little cash for a #1 single. You're more likely to be employed as a music producer than as a lawyer or as an accountant in Lusaka during this period. So it was a really interesting moment in terms of thinking, or why, as you asked, why media? In many ways, that's why. It seemed so, by so many young people at that moment, to be a real strategy that worked.
But isn't it in Zambia that, you know, they're exporting all their doctors and all their nurses to the UK? I mean, aren't there other paths to, am I wrong with that? Or?
Yeah, no, of course. But I wasn't hanging out with a lot of young people who had actually medical degrees. But you're right, there is certainly a professional brain drain in the medical field. That's true of South Africa, that's true of Malawi. And there is a concern there, and that is one path out.
I guess what I'm asking though is, these are different people, they're socially constituted in different ways. I mean, is there a way that the people that end up going to, I don't know how you become a nurse in Zambia, but presumably you have to finish high school and you go to some sort of university or technical college. I mean, I imagine there are a lot of people doing that too. These are people that are just on completely different tracks, or do those paths cross?
Oh, those paths cross. But medical training is seen as very difficult and arduous and expensive. And the young women I knew who were doing nursing and medical studies all of them had what in Zambia they call an MBA, a married but available man. We would often call up our MBAs. I mean, this is like it's a very powerful category in social life, and those folks were paying in some small way for this education. In that sense, it was less doable than entering a reality TV show, which is actually free, right? But certainly that is a circuit, and those young professionals certainly cross paths with unemployed folks who have accountancy degrees who are producing Busele music with little bass in their living room. I mean, you're right. That there isn't just one circuit.
If there are no more questions, I suggest we continue our conversation over the reception. Thank you.
I let it run too long away from you.